Hello everyone, and today we have a wrap-up for the books that I read in the month of August, with rather a boring background, but as we've talked about before, this is called Doing Booktube with a Toddler who is napping. August was a pretty good reading month, although it was a little bit uneven, and we'll get into that a little bit more here, but honestly some pretty fantastic reads that just had a couple of kind of meh reads in between. But I'd like to start out with a couple of books that I'm not going to talk too much about, and that's because I've already done a video on them. But in the month of August, I concluded The Long Price Quartet with, what is this? This is An Autumn War and The Price of Spring. So the last two books in The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. If the first two books hadn't made this clear already, the last two certainly cemented this as one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. There's a couple of battle scenes in An Autumn War, and there's a character gets stabbed in book 2. And other than that, that's all the action that takes place in this series. It's a very action-light series. The whole thing feels like, if you ever watched the series of Henriade plays that Shakespeare wrote, from Richard II, Henry IV, Henry V, the 3 Henry VI plays, and then Richard III. And you're just watching a saga as one character's decisions impacts the next generation and on to the next. That's what the Long Price Quartet feels like. It feels like a collection or a series of plays, but over the course of two main characters' lives. As I said before, I did a video talking about why this series is so good, why it impacted me the way that it did. I found myself feeling like I was not just reading books, but I was reading books that were making me think not only about the story, not only about the characters, but about my own life in ways that I hadn't thought about it before. It was making me think about, what decisions are you making now that are going to impact you and everybody else around you in huge unforeseen ways 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the line. And that's a sobering thought, and The Long Price Quartet puts that front and center and refuses to let you look away. I think An Autumn War is, for a lot of people, that's their favorite book in the quartet, and I think it was for me as well. I think An Autumn War may be one of the best fantasy novels that I've ever read, probably not top 10, but certainly in the top 20, I would say. It has some shocking developments. The world changes, and characters change in ways that I did not see coming. The way that this war is juxtaposed, where you have one culture who uses these super-powered, magical, small god, genie-like beings as super weapons, and then you have another country that uses technology. And so they're able to technologically decimate another country because they haven't developed technology in the same way, and the way that technology plays a part in warfare was explored in some really interesting ways. I think An Autumn War has the most interesting side characters of any of the books in the Long Price Quartet. And that brings me to The Price of Spring, which is a very good ending, but is not my favorite book in the series. The way everything concludes and wraps up, the plot between Ota and Mati, our two main characters, is really good, is really thought-provoking, is very sobering in a lot of ways. The Price of Spring may be the darkest book in the series, but it's not my favorite, and mainly because each book in the Long Price Quartet tends to have a whole new cast of side characters, and the side characters in The Price of Spring were my least favorite. They're not bad characters. They're very well written characters. They're very well realized and fleshed out, and you feel like they're people that you know. So often the characters that Daniel Abraham wrote about in this quartet are not just, they're real life. They're like realistic or real life characters, kind of like what you get from a George Martin. But where George Martin and Joe Abercrombie tend to write characters that are larger than life, Daniel Abraham writes people that you feel like you know. It's like, oh yeah, I know the guy who's kind of like that. Or characters who feel like you, where it's like, oh yeah, I felt that way. I've definitely acted that way. I've definitely thought that before. And so The Price of Spring, while being a great conclusion to the quartet, is maybe one of the weaker books in the series. So this quartet, being one of my favorites of all time, has also really whetted my appetite for more Daniel Abraham. I know his Dagger on the Coin series is sort of his take on like an epic fantasy series. I think it's 5 books. So I want to get to that before too long, but also his Kithamar trilogy, which sort of plays with time and perspective, and it shows you the same events over the course of a year, but from different points of view. That trilogy supposedly will be concluding next year, and I have books 1 and 2 already, so a part of me wants to go just to the Kithamar book. So for right now, I am probably more interested in Daniel Abraham's fantasy works than I am his science fiction with The Expanse and The Mercy of the Gods. Although he has written an urban fantasy series under the pen name MLN Hanover. And maybe some of the worst covers I've ever seen for fantasy novels. But hey, if I'm reading Daniel Abraham, I might as well try it, right? So I'm at least interested in those. So, and then Hunter's Run, which is a book that Daniel Abraham co-wrote with George Martin and one other author. I have that one as well. And that's just a science fiction standalone. So finishing up the Long Price Quartet was a great way to start out the month. But the next read is something that I've had on my TBR for a while. And once again, I've already done a video talking about this, which you can find on iWizard's channel. I read this with Jordan Hill over on iWizard. We read The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. We'd said, what are some books that you have been meaning to read for a while that would be fun to read together? And I threw out a few, and Pillars of the Earth was one of them, so we decided this is what we would read. So we talked about this book in depth over on his channel, so I don't need to bore everyone by recounting it again. But just to say, this book has sort of an intimidating reputation, and that is solely because of the page count, because it's like 1,200 pages. This book was essentially a popcorn read, like a beach read. It's very easy to get into. The characters are very easy to connect with and pick up with their story, and easy to follow along with, and even the political maneuvering that happens quite a bit in this book is fairly straightforward, fairly easy to keep track of. Really, the only thing in the prose is very digestible, very readable. The only thing intimidating about Pillars of the Earth really is the length of it, which I felt like it read very, very fast for as long as it is. So this book has a very famous reputation for a reason. People say, oh, it's about building a cathedral, but really it's about the town of Kingsbridge and about a mason named Tom who is starving, and a mason and carpenter named Tom who is starving. His family is destitute, and the town of Kingsbridge needs a new church. And so it's about him trying to convince the town of Kingsbridge to let him build a church, which obviously you'd know based on the topic of the book that he succeeds to one extent or another. It's about the local prior, his name is Philip, who is trying to deal with the struggle of both being a good prior and monk and a good man of God, while also being a cunning and a crafty man of politics as well, to be able to get the resources and support that he needs to have this church built. And it is also about a local, wealthy, noble family that finds itself destitute, and the children must fend for themselves, and they get involved in the building of the cathedral as well. So people say, oh, it's a book about building a cathedral, and in a sense that's true, but it's more about the people around it. It's more about the lives that are impacted by this. It's like the cathedral is the centerpiece amongst which the story takes place. But there's not a whole lot of, today we went up on the roof and we put more planks on the roof to build the cathedral. There's not a lot of that over the course of the book, which is good. It is not boring. For a boring topic, or at least what would sound like a boring topic, it is kept very interesting. The bad guys are despicable through and through. Honestly, I would say that's like a criticism of the book, is the bad guys, basically every one of them is a rapist. It gets a little bit over the top by the end of the book, where it's like, oh, and are they going to raid a village or rape more people? And it's one of the two always. So that's one criticism that I do have of the book, is that some points get a little predictable. Some of the character arcs I found were very easy to figure out what would happen. Where it's like a character is introduced and I go, I wonder if they're going to do this in a few chapters. And sure enough, they do that. And for some people, that's not going to be a bad thing. But I felt like some of that was signposted a little bit too much. Some of it was just a little bit too obvious. So for many people, this is an all-time book. Top 10, one of their favorite novels of all time. I don't feel like it's that for me. I enjoyed it. I'm glad it gave me the confidence to read more historical fiction in the upcoming month, September here. I'm wanting to read, I'm pondering either reading Byzantium by Stephen Wahed, which is a historical fiction novel about a monk traveling to the Byzantine Empire, or I, Claudius by Robert Graves, which is, one of the most famous, another one of these epic, most famous historical fiction novels ever written. So it's given me the confidence to want to read more historical fiction, even if it's not personally an all-time favorite for me. But I definitely see why so many people love it. I think the biggest barrier for entry is going to be the length, and then also that the book gets exceptionally dark at times. When I was talking to Jordan, I said it's like heaven and hell meet upon the pillars of the earth. It's sort of a fitting title in that sense, that there's very good, holy, godly, kind, compassionate, loving, charitable characters, and there are despicable, scum of the earth, make you want to throw the book against the wall, frustratingly evil bad guys. And so I enjoyed it. On the whole, I enjoyed it. I do have my flaws. I think there are parts where Ken Follett is gratuitous, where he's graphic, where he doesn't need to be. And I think some of the bad guy stuff goes a little bit far. But if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts about the things that I really liked about the book, and some of my criticisms too, you can check out Jordan's video. I will link that down below if it's out by now, which it should be. But yeah, good read, enjoyable read. I don't know how widely I'd recommend it, just because I think a lot of people will be put off by how dark the book gets. But if you're interested, it doesn't hurt to try it, and you'll know pretty soon into the book. Ken Follett lets you know within a few chapters the type of book that you'll be in for. So that's Pillars of the Earth, which was followed up with, other than a DNF that we're going to talk about later, what's probably my most disappointing read of the month, and that is the Illearth War by Stephen R. Donaldson. So I've been reading through the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant with Jake from Nerd Level Rising, and then Zach from Zachary Shea. And so this is book 2 in the trilogy. And I liked book 1. I don't think I liked it as much as Jake, but I think I liked it more than Zach. And both of them liked this book more than I did. I think that my biggest problem with these Thomas Covenant books is that Stephen Donaldson really likes his world building and thinks he's doing some really cool things with his world building. And I find it to be very boring and very unmemorable. I find it very difficult to have it stick in my brain. I think it goes in one ear and out the other. And I just don't think it's very well done. I think it's very generic, classic fantasy in terms of the world building. Now, the character of Thomas Covenant, for as evil of a character as he is, and as frustrating of a character as he is, I could read about him all day because he's interesting, he's memorable. The contrast between the beauty of the world and how angry and bitter he is very, very interesting to read about. There's a new character in this book that we follow for a bit whose name is Troy. And he's, once again, a very interesting character. I didn't find his arc as interesting as the other guys did, I think. But those characters I find interesting and compelling. But many of the side characters, I'm sad to say, fell flat for me, even in this book. So it makes me a little bit hesitant to go into book 3, The Power That Preserves, especially since this one did not click for me the way I was hoping it would. Many of the ideas that Donaldson is playing with, I think, are fun ideas to read about and to explore. But in the execution, it was a challenge to get through this book because I did not enjoy a lot of things about it. But hey, what can you do? The next book that I'll talk about is, I said I was going to read a DJ Butler book, and that did not happen. And as I said in my TBR video that'll be coming out soon, that is because I am a liar. So instead, and this was sort of in prep to talk to Aaron Erber about Tim Powers, but that video should already be out, I read On Stranger Tides by Tim Powers. This is a novel I tried reading a few months ago and just was not in the mood for it, wasn't clicking for me, so I put it down for the time being. And I decided to come back to it. And as it turns out, it's great. So the Tim Powers novel On Stranger Tides is his pirate novel, and it is the novel that the Pirates of the Caribbean, the fourth one, On Stranger Tides, is loosely based on. Now really, aside from a couple of quotes, the only thing they take from it is Blackbeard being a sorcerer, zombie pirates, and the Fountain of Youth being part of the story. Really, other than that, like the two stories are completely different. But it is about a young man named Jack Shandy, who is traveling to the Caribbean islands, I think to Haiti, actually, because he has an uncle who has stolen his inheritance over in Haiti. And so he's going over to Haiti to basically oust his uncle and reclaim what is rightfully his. And on his way, he meets this basically sorcerer character whose wife has died, and he is trying to resurrect his wife using voodoo and other dark magical means. And you get Tim Powers' slightly sci-fi explanations for things coming in, and the plot takes all sorts of twists and turns, and we go from there. I'll say this. On Stranger Tides is not Tim Powers' best novel, but it's not a bad novel to start with. As I was reading it, I was like, man, this is more accessible than some of his other novels that I've read of his. This is very entertaining. There's a lot of fun action. This is probably one of my favorite pirate novels. I might even like this more than Pirate Freedom by Gene Wolfe. It might not be as solid of a novel, but it might be more, but I think it's probably more entertaining than Pirate Freedom. So I liked On Stranger Tides by Tim Powers a lot. It just cemented him as a new favorite fantasy author for me. So if you guys have read a Tim Powers novel before and it just didn't work for you or it didn't click, depending on the reasons why, I think On Stranger Tides is, one, not a bad starting place, and two, not a bad one to see, like, okay, is this working for me or not? The other thing that I read a couple of novellas and short stories this month. And one that I'd like to talk about briefly here is The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. This is a short story that I read for a project that will be coming out sometime in the next few weeks here of trying to read some more short stories. And this is for Leo Tolstoy, who's known for War and Peace, which is a beast of a book, and Anna Karenina, which is shorter but still very long. It's funny that Tolstoy is known for also writing this short story, which begins with Ivan Ilyich's funeral and then flashes back and covers his life and goes over it until, the point of him dying. And obviously, based on the title of the short story, it has a lot to say about death. I guess I won't say a whole lot, because it's hard to talk about a short story without spoiling the whole thing, other than, for being about death, this short story is pretty funny, honestly. There's a lot of comedic things about it. It reminded me of Stoner by John Williams in some ways, and also has the type of reflective tone that something like Our Town has, that makes you think about your life and the way you're living it and what you're prioritizing. So if you haven't read this, I recommend it. It's one of the best short stories I've read. I know, hot take, like The Death of Ivan Ilyich, one of the most famous short stories out there, is actually good, guys. One other thing that I'd like to mention here, though, before we wrap this up, is I finished out the month, and the last thing that I completed was the novella Orders of Magnitude by Yuval Kordov. So I have been meaning to for a while now, and I mentioned this in my indie books that I want to read before too long. I have been meaning to read some Incense-Punk novels, and Incense-Punk is basically just a funny term and hashtag for science fiction novels that deal with religion seriously. So older novels that they would look at as sort of like forerunners of this would be Hyperion by Dan Simmons, Canticle for Leibowitz, Gene Wolfe, probably the Sun Eater books, and adjacent but a little bit less so would be like Warhammer and Dune. Basically saying things like Star Trek that just surgically remove religion from the future is silly, because religion has basically always been around and probably always will, and so looking at what that would look like in the future. And so Orders of Magnitude is about a troop of space marines who get sent to the moon. There's a colony on the moon, and a recent evacuation has had a lot of people leave because they started seeing visions of the Virgin Mary appearing and telling people to get out, get away. And so a group of space marines that have been commissioned by the Vatican go to basically investigate this and figure out what's going on and check up with the last few survivors who are left on the moon. And so, anyway, so it's a really interesting concept for a novella. Once again, I can't go into a whole lot of detail about it without giving it all away, except to say it's really good. It's a little expensive for like just buying a novella. You know, it's pretty short. Like the audiobook was like $10, $12, something like that, and it's only 3 hours long. But like, it was money well spent. You know, I can't complain because it's a great little novella. And if this is, I've been saying, if this is what Incense-Punk is, then count me in, because this was really entertaining. And it's interesting because it is written very much within a Catholic framework, but Yuval Cordov, the author, is not Catholic. I don't even think he's a Christian, but he's writing from that point of view. And I found that to be very well represented and really interesting. So I've got Yuval Cordov's first book in his trilogy. I think it's called The Hand of God. I've got that physically that I own already. So I want to read more of his stuff, and I want to read more of what these Incense-Punk guys put out, because this novella was great. So yeah, I'm going to say briefly like what I have been reading and what I have yet to finish up. Near the end of the month, I started Deathless Beast by Andrew D. Meredith. This is the first book in his Collation saga. As of the time of recording this, I'm about 10% of the way through and really liking it. Don't have a whole lot of thoughts so far, other than I'm glad I'm finally reading this. I've been reading lots of Meredith's other stuff this year, and it's been, you know, good to one extent or another, and I'm really excited to get into his big epic fantasy series that he's been working on. And then the last thing that I'll mention is the novel Cuba Fruit by Alexander Sarando. This is a really weird, surrealist, maybe magical realism thriller novel about a revolt in a fictional South American country, a revolt uprising. I don't know what to make of this. I'm enjoying it, but I've been reading it basically all month because I've been sidetracked with one thing or the other and haven't sat down and just finished it. But it reads very fast, so I just need to put my big boy pants on and actually finish it, because I've only got like 150, 200 pages left. But I definitely want to talk about this more when I finish it. This came highly recommended to me by Steve Donahue. So, got a copy of it, and I've been reading it, and yeah, Steve, that's a weird book, but I'm liking it so far. I think Jared Henderson also recommended this book. So, so far I'm liking it, but I'm not going to give any conclusive thoughts on this weird book until I finish it. So anyway, guys, this is what I've been reading in the month of August. Look forward to a TBR video coming out before too long. I'm excited for some upcoming reads in September, but let me know what you read in August, or let me know what your favorite book is that you read in August. I'd love to hear it. So thank you guys for watching this video. Take care.